Education is called to order, and thank you for your patience as you waited for us to get here today. Just a couple of announcements. We are going to be passing for the week on SB 237, school attendance officers. We're also going to pass by for the week SB 327, cost of competing adjustment and eligibility. And we are striking at the request of the patron SB 299, potable water with a purified water bottle filling station. And just another quick announcement in the interest of time, because we do have about 45 bills to cover in the next 3 weeks. We're going to try to limit discussion on bills for about 10 minutes. If you are part of an organization, if you could select one individual to speak to the bill and express your concerns, that would be helpful in the interest of time. We certainly want to give everybody an opportunity to express their concerns. We'll do our best, but we also would like to try to expedite the process as we consider many of our bills today. Senator Boysko, your bill is up first. Thank you.
Oh, there you are. I just texted you. Huh? I just texted you.
Senator Boysko, welcome. You're speaking to SB 853.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. I have an amendment related to a substitute.
So we have a motion to move and second on the amendment. And what is the amendment?
From the original bill. It is, the original intent of the bill was just to ask the DOE to provide guidance and model curriculum and teacher training to provide age-appropriate instruction on historically dehumanizing injustice, I guess is the way to put it. The DOE looked at the bill. They wanted really to expand the scope and asked that we put in language that would create an advisory committee to really guide the process as part of the inclusion of their efforts in cultural competency and social and emotional education. And I have members here today to talk about it.
Okay, thank you. So, are there any questions from the committee members before we get started? Thank you. So you have representatives to speak to?
I do have someone from the DOE here.
Hi, good afternoon. Emily Webb with the Department of Education. We'd like to thank Senator Boysko for working with us on this substitute. This bill really, as she said, expands what her original bill does to create a cultural competencies commission to really look at our history standards. We want to be thoughtful and have a complete and thorough review. There are several bills dealing with different pieces of it, such as Holocaust and genocide, and we want to have a more holistic approach to make sure that our standards review, which we will be starting within the next 2 years, is really comprehensive. So we're in full support of the bill, as is the Secretary's office.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else is speaking in favor of the bill?
My name is Sam Asher. I'm the director of the Virginia Holocaust Museum, and I thank you for taking time to look at this important endeavor. We teach tolerance through education. We tell the story through the eyes of Richmond Holocaust survivors. This year we educated over 50 teachers in 2 sessions of our Holocaust Education Institute. The program was a success. Often the teachers bring their students back to the Virginia Holocaust Museum for very, very, very important tours and teaching more about the Holocaust. The teachers, about half of which bring back their students. And we think if we were able to double, triple, quadruple the number of teachers that we can talk to, we'd be able to bring that many more students into the building and give them a better education. As an example, this past year we had a foundation grant to bring people from Southwest Virginia to the building. And we have educated someone from just about every state in the state of Virginia, from every county in the state of Virginia. So if we can do more, if we can reach out more, it would be better. The statistics tell us, last year, from the Show and Consulting Group, that the more Americans know about the Holocaust, the more likely they are to keep away from racism, intolerance, and anti-Semitism. The reverse is also true. When people have not heard about the Holocaust, they are more likely to tolerate anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred. We are concerned about the people who don't have enough education, and we can double it and triple it, and we can bring information from the Virginia Holocaust Museum all over the state, package the program, and bring it out. So we're hoping that we can do more to educate more people. This is, without a question, a top priority. We are all the keepers of the memories, everyone in this room. We need to help continue to be a beacon of hope, and we need to stand up against racism, anti-Semitism, and all forms of bigotry. Please help us by passing this bill.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. I'm here representing public school students in Virginia. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak here. My name is Claudia Sachs, and I am an activist, the Vice President of Jewish Programming for my Jewish Youth Group, and a junior at Glen Allen High School. I'm also a proud member of the Richmond Jewish community. Today I will share 2 short stories that demonstrate why we need to strengthen Holocaust and anti-hate education in Virginia. A few years ago in my history class, the teacher posed the question, "What have you learned about the Holocaust?" With strange confidence, a classmate responded, "I think 1,000 people died." The problem here was that Virginia had failed to teach her about the 6 million Jews who died in the Holocaust. Even though the Holocaust is a part of our SOL curriculum, we still just spend 10 minutes learning about it. And 10 minutes will not prevent these students from barring their ignorance. 2 years ago, I saw the impact of that ignorance firsthand. In Spanish class, 2 senior boys were making racist jokes and Holocaust jokes. When I spoke up, one of them told me to go take a shower. At first, I was in shock. I asked him what he meant. He looked at me in the eye and said, "I meant the showers of the Holocaust." I was outraged, and I was so afraid. I told him that my great-grandmother died in those showers, and the Holocaust should never be turned into a joke. And I've had other experiences, like the boys who were laughing as they drew swastikas on the back of my bus. And other kids have told me casually, asking if I have a Jew face or Jew smarts. I would still really like to believe that my peers who use these hateful images and spoke those hateful words are not anti-Semites, nor are they Holocaust deniers. My peers were ignorant, and their ignorance is a product of the current lack of education about the Holocaust and discrimination in Virginia public schools. After experiencing multiple anti-Semitic incidents, I wrote op-eds and editorials in the Richmond Times-Dispatch and was featured in an NBC 12 story. I decided to speak out like I'm doing now, but I can only do so much on my own. I discussed Holocaust education with my principal, Mr. Davenport, and he was eager to add more Holocaust and discrimination-related education to the curriculum, but he does not have the power to change the Virginia state standards. You alone have that power. Holocaust and anti-hate education have been severely neglected in Virginia. At this historic moment, you can vote for SB 853 to ensure that all students get the best possible education about anti-Semitism and racism. They all need to know about what happened in Auschwitz. They need to know about the legacy of slavery in Virginia, including the slave auctions that occurred just blocks from this building. They need to know about the hate that continues to intensify when Charlottesville white supremacists went through the street shouting, "Jews will not replace us." I need to know that all of you here today and all of the Virginia legislators can look me in the eye and promise to protect me. Protect me from bigotry. Protect me from anti-Semitism. Protect me from hate. Protect us all from ignorance by properly educating every student in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Please vote for SB 853.
Thank you. If I can ask you to keep comments brief, that would be wonderful.
1 second. As Claudia described, the rise in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and other racism is really taking us all, we're trying to catch our breath with it. We know that the study of the Holocaust can be the case study for looking at all of that, can be the lens by which our students can really learn and to understand. And we also have data knowing that it helps to teach respect for differences and understanding prejudice and racism. So we appreciate you hearing this bill and encourage your support.
Thank you. We certainly appreciate Claudia's eloquence in making her point. Thank you, Claudia. Are there any individuals here who would like to speak against the bill?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, not really, we really appreciate the motive behind this. I think we all benefit from being able to learn more about Holocaust survivors, about what happened when 6 million Jews were slaughtered by a fascist dictator. Every school child should be learning about this. We completely agree. I think we do have some concerns with some of the terms that are used in there, that we would caution you on use of terms like bigotry, which are not really defined in the code, and we would be allowing a government agency to sort of come up with those terms. However, I will say that one of our concerns was that there was going to be no input from the public, but I was glad to hear that there would be some guidance, including the substitute. I haven't seen the substitute version. So I would just urge caution over the use of those terms in the code, and just the extent in which they could be used for if this curriculum were to be expanded going forward. Because we want to make sure that we're not introducing language that could also be used to, that conflict with parental authority and what they're teaching their kids at home. But again, we appreciate the overall motive, but we do have some concerns about the language that's included in the code, or in the bill that's being proposed.
Thank you. Senator Boysko.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I would just like to reiterate that this bill was drafted in coordination and consultation with the Department of Education as part of their social and emotional learning context. But I do want to make certain that everybody in the audience knows that the advisory committee that is being proposed shall include, but not be limited to, a geographically, ethnically, and religiously diverse representation of teachers, curriculum specialists, principals, superintendents, advocates, higher education institutions, parents, legislators, and community-based organizations. And so it is intended to be a broad, diverse group of people who have differing understandings and experiences to bring their insight to this advisory council, so that lots of points of view and lots of different backgrounds are included in our very multicultural Commonwealth. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
It's a pleasure
Senator.
to ask them to go on.
Thank you. Virginia, a few minutes.
You do, and you can proceed, and I can abstain as the chair.
Is there a motion on the bill? I second. All in favor? Aye. That's
I'll
three
abstain.
ayes and 1 abstention. Thank you, Senator. And to Senators. If Senator Deeds and Senator Bell wouldn't mind, if we could just hear from Senator Stewart first, is that okay? I ask your indulgence.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I suspect it's because there may be a lot of people who don't like my bill. Madam Chair,
Thank you, Senator.
I would first request we strike Senate Bill 339 didn't see coming, but I can see it now, so I just soon let that one go.
Okay,
Do you want me to present my other two?
if you could, please.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Does the audience understand that everyone should be in favor of
There are several
that?
people.
So it's like a minute straight.
We struck Senate Bill 339 for those that are interested. That's the most applause I've ever gotten on anything. I didn't even get it passed.
It was for that bill that I was having you leapfrog over the other two senators, but if you'll continue to indulge us, we'll go ahead and let Senator Stewart proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, so Senate Bill 135 is a really good bill. And I'll tell you at the outset, this bill has passed the Senate of Virginia, I think in committee and on the floor unanimously for like 5 years in a row, only to get muddled up in the House appropriations. The issue, most concisely as I can explain it, is it expands eligibility under the CSA to allow children to be, that otherwise would be brought to, and I don't know dispersion towards Faison, but would be placed at Faison in Richmond, could actually stay in a community set up in their hometown. Stafford County has done this. They've educated these children, and they've done a really good job at it at significant savings. Now, for me, it's not all about the money. Everybody knows I have a child that's high functioning autistic. And what I have learned over the years is that you can educate, and she was in public school and went through the system and was able to be educated very well, I believe. When you can keep special needs children at home, they flourish much better than if they have to be placed in a residential facility. They are with their families, they're with their friends. Hard enough for them to make friends as it is. But when they stay in their community, it is all around a better situation. And Stafford has proved that we can do that and do it at a cost savings. And so we're asking for the flexibility to do this in Planning District 16 so that we can prove to everybody that we can do it well, we can save money at it, and what's most important to me is that these children can get the education they deserve and live in the community with their family and friends, which I think is worth more than money. And that's the bill in its simplest form.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any questions from committee members?
They heard it before.
Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to speak for the bill?
Madam Chairman, Mary Tom Smith, the Superintendent's Association. The Senator's right, this is a really good bill. Having been a special ed director and sat on the first state management team of the CSA back in the 90s, this goes to the intent and heart of what we tried to do back then. So we would ask that you support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, Stacy Hayne on behalf of Virginia School Boards Association. We've supported this bill every year. The Senator has brought it. This is really important because this bill will incentivize school divisions like Stafford to develop programs where they can serve these students in the local public schools in their own communities. The way the CSA funding is set up now, we're to some extent disincentivized from serving some of our highest need students because there's additional money that's available if these students go to a private school that funding that we can't get if we keep them in the public school. And so this is a really good way to incentivize our public schools to develop these programs the way that Stafford has done. And if we can show that this works well in Stafford, then other school divisions will also have that incentive to develop those good programs. And so we would ask that you support the bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mike Aces, I'm with the Virginia Council of Administrators and Special Ed to support this bill. We work every day to bring students back to more inclusive environments in public school programs. We recognize that their CSA funds, this flexibility will just help with that. They used to do that in 2010. They used to provide the wraparound services, more wraparound services to allow these kinds of transitions to support the students being included in public schools. We know that with prefer having more money to provide more intensive services in the education budget, but I just think this flexibility will help add to the pool of money that can help our students stay in public schools. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm Sue Roland, and I'm with Roanoke County, who also is very supportive of this particular bill, and even has its own bill to do some work in this same area. One of the things that you might think about as you're considering this bill is, this is not going to work for all kids. There will still be some kids who are of such need that services provided by others will still be necessary and very important. But there are also kids that this provides their parents then the opportunity to have a choice of where services would be provided for them. So thanks.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Eldon James on behalf of the localities of Planning District 16. And we all support this bill. As was mentioned a moment ago about being around for a while, I was a county administrator in the early 90s when we stood this program up. And you had the ability to work in the community and give parents that choice. We'd like the opportunity to demonstrate that that can work and work effectively.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman. Jeremy Bennett with the Virginia Association of Counties. We're very much in favor of this bill. We support having local choices and local solutions for these sorts of problems, and the ability of our school divisions to take care of their students in their own communities and homes.
Thank you.
Apologize for my voice. Julia Carter Hammond on behalf of Stafford County. We are very proud of our Public Day School. We've done all that we can to make up the difference between what we receive from those students in the public school system and the extra services that are provided. Without this change, we won't be able to grow the program to meet the needs of the families and students that are there. Obviously, working in conjunction with everyone that is part of the IE process. Stafford really wants to do all that we can so the students aren't trapped on buses for 2 hours a day each way to go to schools when they can get those services in their community and possibly even go to the same school as their siblings and their friends and their neighbors. So thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Jessica Ackerman with Virginia Union's Foley. I'll echo all colleagues in support as well.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak against the bill?
Madam Chair, I'm
Yeah.
with Bill Elwood with the Virginia Association of Independent Specialized Education Facilities. We're the private special education schools that provide the services. I don't want to speak against Senator's bill. He's been doing a fine job on this for many years. Stafford County's doing a lot of great things too. Our only concern is that this is a pretty significant change in policy in terms of letting a public school system tap into a some sufficient fund that has been set aside to provide education in private settings, when it's already been decided at the local level that they can't be served there. It's a very complex issue. Right now, there's an ongoing JLARC study, both of special education and the CSA. We just ask that you proceed cautiously while they're still doing this work. Certainly, there's the potential for some significant fiscal impact here along the way. But again, we agree and support the objective to serve children as close as you can to their schools. And thank Senator Stewart for bringing this to your attention.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak against the bill? Is there a motion for the bill? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
That's 5 ayes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator Deeds, thank you for your patience, appreciate that.
Madam Chairman of the committee, I have the Senate Bill 324, and I think there's a substitute.
Senate Bill 324.
324 with a substitute.
With a substitute. There's a move for the substitute. Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Can you speak to the bill?
Well, what this bill simply does, it adds school bus drivers to existing language with respect to critical shortages in the school system. Sets forth requirements they have to do to bring back a retired driver. The amendment ensures that the retiree can legally return to work while still receiving benefits, VRS benefits. Came at the request of the Albemarle County School Board, but it's been identified too by other school systems that the shortage of school bus drivers. Doug Bell is carrying a companion bill in the House. The amendments containing the substitute make our bills identical. We worked with VRS to make sure the language was technically correct. And we understand with the amendment, the bill has no fiscal impact.
Was the amendment just technical? Madam Chair, was the amendment technical?
The amendment was to make sure that, the amendment was technical, the bills are
I got you.
to coordinate the bills, into alignment and make sure that VRS, somebody who's receiving VRS could come back and do the work without affecting their benefits. That's what makes it fiscally neutral.
Does the committee have any other questions?
I've got somebody here from Albemarle County to speak to the bill if you need it.
Is there, would you like to bring somebody to speak to the bill?
Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. I'm Jim Foley. I'm the Director of Transportation at Albemarle County Public Schools. Through the Virginia Association of Pupil Transportation, we conducted a survey of all 133 school districts in the state. Half of them responded, and 80% of those are short-staffed on school bus drivers. So passage of this bill will help us retain and recruit more drivers. I'm sure maybe you yourself with your children and certainly your constituents have experienced the deleterious effects of not having enough school bus drivers. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman of the Committee, Thompson Superintendent Association. As you heard, this is not just an Albemarle problem, this is a statewide problem. And in fact, it's a nationwide problem. Participated in a conference in November in Atlanta, and we see that, and the number one subject that we talked about was the lack of bus drivers. The problem when you don't have enough bus drivers, you have double runs, people get home late, kids get home late, so we would ask that you support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Kathy Bircher with the Virginia Education Association. We support the bill, not just for the reasons mentioned, but also because of the implication on teachers' planning time that is oftentimes in the elementary schools at the end of the day. Because of the pieces that Mr. Smith described, oftentimes teachers are left during those double runs supervising students instead of taking advantage of some planning time, so we support the bill.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Beth Neal with middle and high school principals. We thank Senator Dean for bringing this bill and highlighting this critical need in almost all of our schools. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Michael Malloy, Fairfax County Schools. This is definitely a statewide issue. Even in Fairfax, we have school bus driver shortages, so we appreciate any call. Thank you.
Thank you.
John Suggs with Virginia Professional Educators. We support the bill. I work with a group of bus drivers here locally in the Richmond area, and they work for one of the local school boards. The bus drivers want VRS coverage. I believe the local school board wants to cover them. The problem is that presently some of the drivers that are employed are retired police officers, retired state police officers, and they would have to give up those positions. The school board would have to let those police officers go. And they don't want to do that because those employees are natural authority figures, and they're great bus drivers. So this would solve the problem, and we strongly support the bill. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, State School Board Association will also support the bill.
Okay, thank you. Are there any objections to the bill? Does anybody wish to speak against the bill? All in favor of the bill, please say aye. Aye. 5 ayes. Thank you, Senator. Senator Bell, thank you for your patience.
Madam Chair, this is Senate Bill 377, and this bill addresses, I think, some inequities that currently exist, and frankly takes us back to the dismissal board hearings we would have for our teachers. We currently have a teacher shortage in Virginia. We've been struggling each year with a shortage of about 1,000 teachers. I think one of the issues we have is making sure
that we have a teacher, that fairness is part of it. Today, frankly, if a complaint is made against a teacher and a school board is faced with that, they have the ability to either do a hearing officer, which they pick, or they can do it themselves. What this would do is add the same procedures that we offer for our law enforcement, firefighting professionals, where the teacher would get to pick one person, the school board would get to pick one, and then two together would pick a third. I think it's a fair process, and it frankly would make sure that if someone is facing dismissal from their job, they have a chance to have a hearing that's fair. Frankly, I think school boards would also benefit from this option because it would prevent them from lawsuits for wrongful termination, because they would have a more fair process that would likely be less objections from others. So with that, Madam Chair, I know there's some people here to speak to this, but I'll have to answer any questions you might have.
I do have one question. You're removing the timeline for the teacher grievance hearing, that it needs to be set within 15 days. Is there a timeline that you would want to add to the bill, or is it indefinite?
Well, Madam Chair, to answer your question, the 15 days was taken off. It would hopefully be done quickly, but if you'll note, the timeline on the notification teacher was actually raised from 5 to 10 days. And I think that the school board is gonna wanna do this quickly. We didn't want to restrict, because in some cases that was an issue, school boards couldn't do the hearing within that period of time. However, we still wanted to make sure a teacher wouldn't be given very little notice and have no time to have witnesses and people come forward. So while one was eliminated, one was doubled in time, still a very short, reasonable time.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? And does anybody want to speak to the bill?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, Kathy Burke with the Virginia Education Association. This has been a long-standing position of the Virginia Education Association to bring back the option of a 3-person panel. It was eliminated in code in 2013. It did exist for teachers prior to that year. This bill is permissive. Each school board may elect, and that's important because certainly we know different school boards operate in different ways. I will say that what we have heard consistently in the field is that when teachers are facing dismissal and they recognize that they're going before a hearing officer, rather than face the hearing that some will consider unfair, they quit rather than face that hearing. So we believe that a 3-person panel and the permissiveness of this bill is important, and we urge you to support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm John Suzza, Virginia Professional Educators. We strongly support the bill for the reasons stated. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Stacey Haney with the School Board Association. We are opposed to the legislation. As Kathy pointed out, this was in the code in 2013 and was taken out, and there were a lot of stakeholders at the table at that time. One of the reasons that the 3-person panel was taken out, I was very involved, so I can tell you, one of the reasons the panel was taken out is because the panel was, in the process of selecting the panel, was often used to drag the process out. And so before these changes went into effect, the teacher grievance process would regularly take 4 to 6 months. And that's not good for the teacher, and it's not good for the school system, and it's not good for the students who are in that class, when often the teacher's not in the class when these proceedings are pending. So it's not good for anyone for the proceedings to drag on, but the selection of those members would, and so particularly adding that back in and then striking the 15 days. And in my practice, and I handle a lot of these hearings in my practice, we will often work with the teacher and their attorney if we need to extend the time, but to completely strike the time limit from the statute means that we're gonna go back to it taking 4 to 6 months to get through this process, and that doesn't do anyone any good. And so I would ask that you not favorably act on this legislation. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Thomas with the Superintendent's Association, we are opposed based on the comments from the School Board Association.
Okay, thank you.
Right. So right now, do you want to?
I'll just say, Madam Chairman, and Senator Bell, my county was involved in those discussions as well several years ago when they looked at some of the challenges of this process, and they came up with a stakeholder position that is what we have today. And I think you're proposing to kind of go back to what those stakeholders found wasn't working, as we heard
the insights that we had here, so I am opposed to this bill, and I don't know if he wants to comment or if you're ready for a motion.
Madam Chair, I would like to comment on it. I would say, frankly, the school board, as long as they give the 10 days notification, would move the process forward. So if it takes 4 or 5 months, it's because the school board's not acting. So I think that item is frankly not valid. And while this process may have worked well for some stakeholders, I can tell you it didn't work well for teachers and other stakeholders. And I think we need to have a process that again, is permissive, but it works well for all stakeholders. We also have a retention issue with our teachers that we didn't have before. And since we've changed this, I think it's a contributing factor. Our teachers are the foundation for much of the success in our country. It's hard to get teachers who often take lower pay to do the job. My mother was a teacher for 40 years, and I think they need to know if somebody makes a complaint that they're not gonna have a kangaroo court and they're gonna get a fair shake. And I thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Senator. Yes.
I agree with, the senator, teachers are stakeholders too. And the process was not working well for them. And I think that at the root cause of all of this, if teachers feel that they're not the ones getting a fair shake, then we need to have a process that's going to work well for them.
Is there a motion on the bill?
I'll move the report. Senator Howell seconds.
There's a motion to forward the bill. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Senator Howell is not.
Any opposed?
No.
That's 2 noes and 3 ayes.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you for your time.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to.
Let's see. Senator Locke, would you go ahead and present your bill? That is SB 98.
Yes,
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senate Bill 98 was also one of those 2013 casualties. What Senate Bill 13 will do is it will remove the option for local school boards to extend the 3-year probationary term of service for teachers by up to 2 additional years. And the probation against school boards and re-employing any teacher whose performance evaluation during the probationary term of service is unsatisfactory. In terms of some additional information, in 2013, the General Assembly added language to the Virginia Code that allows for the probationary period for teachers be 5 years. Prior to that change, Virginia mandated only a 3-year probation period. The goal of the 2013 language was to ensure that teachers with up to 5 years of experience could be fired without due process. A probationary period for teachers had for decades prior to this change had only been 3 years. To be clear, and the whole discussion in 2013 was around the fact that teachers could not be fired. To be clear, the code grants wide reasons to terminate any teacher. It is not hard to fire a teacher. 22.1-307 in the code gives any number of grounds for dismissal of a teacher. Virginia is only one of a handful of states that can deny teachers due process for up to 5 years. There are 35 states in the country that have 3-year probationary periods for teachers. Virginia has one of the longest probationary periods for teachers in the country. And what this bill would do is go back to what we did prior to 2013, that is the 3-year probationary period.
Thank you. Are there any questions from committee members? Anyone want to speak in favor of the bill?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, I'm Kathy Birch with the Virginia Education Association. This is a top legislative priority for this for many of the reasons that the senator described. I did want to point out that classified state employees have only a 1-year probation. On average, according to a Fulbright study of over 400 large company executives, the average time for professional probation is between 3 and 6 months. Obviously, teaching is a different kind of profession. The VEA, we believe that after 3 years, the superintendents and the school administrators should have ample opportunity to make corrections to that teacher or remove that teacher. And during that 3-year time, that teacher does not have due process. A teacher in their 4th and 5th year of their career should know that they have due process available to them. And that's truly what this bill is about. And also keeping in mind that we have a large number, in fact, most teachers in Virginia are good teachers. To have a career where 5 years in, you are still on probation. If I have served in a probationary job, even at the VA, I had a probation, mine was 45 days. I kind of counted down, and I feel like I'm pretty good at my job, but I was still grateful to be off of probation and to know that due process was available to me. So we ask that you support the bill.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm Vernon Peters, I'm representing the Virginia Professional Educators, and we too support the bill for the reasons just stated.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, Stacey Haney on behalf of the Virginia School Board Association again. Again, this was part of the package we talked about earlier that was all adopted in 2013. And the impetus behind extending the probationary period, and let's be clear, it's an optional extension. Under former law, before 2013, it was a 3-year probationary period, in or out. After 3 years, the teacher was either non-renewed and they were gone, or they received continuing contract status. The change in the law in 2013 gave school boards the option, didn't require, but gave the option of extending that probationary period to as much as 5 years. The reason behind this, and it was my former law partner who proposed this idea that ended up in the legislation, the reason behind this is that year after year, our clients, superintendents, would come to us and say, I have a teacher who is on the bubble. We're in year 3 and I'm not sure. Can I extend the probationary period to give that teacher another year or 2 to show their proficiency? And under the former law, the answer is no. You had 3 years and that was it. But since 2013, we've had that option to give teachers extra time to show their proficiency. If this bill passes, then the advice will be at year 3, if you have a shadow of a doubt, you need to non-renew the teacher, because that's what it was before. And so you're taking that option away, and I respectfully submit that the VA is cutting off its nose to spite its face here. Because what will happen if this bill passes is those teachers who are on the bubble will be non-renewed and they'll be out of a job and it'll be career ending, instead of giving them extra time to demonstrate that proficiency. And so I would strongly urge you not to support this legislation. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Thank you.
Stacy?
Yes, I'm sorry.
I just, Madam Chairman, a couple of questions. One is, so do you know the incidence of how many people are given 2 extra years of probation after 3 in the state of Virginia? Do you know how often that's utilized?
I don't have the statistics, no.
Kathy, do you?
Madam Chair, Senator Donovan, if I may, exact numbers, no, but what we do know, we surveyed the 132 school divisions in Virginia. Half of them replied, and most of those that replied have a 5-year probation. While I appreciate it's optional, they have gone to a strict 5-year.
Does that answer?
It partially answers the question, and I would just say, it seems to make a lot of sense to me that this legislation's intent was to give teachers in jeopardy an extra chance, as opposed to put in jeopardy most teachers of extra probation. And I'm wondering if there's a better way to do this so that we actually accomplish that goal with the language and say that it's a 3-year probation with an exception to be allowed to go to 5 in certain cases, so that we protect, people get due process justly, but we also make sure that teachers on the bubble don't get cut free, because we know it takes a while to develop in any job, and I would like to have, I don't think that both things are impossible. I think we could have both and limit it to the 3 years, and then if there's a way to cite for teachers that, that it's not necessarily you have to go after 3 years, that there is an option on a case-by-case review for 2 additional years of probation for, with the expectation it will help them meet their, I don't know how to say it, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't wanna see them be sent away after 3 years. That will make our shortage worse. But at the same time, I want teachers to have, I want a good teacher that's good from the get-go, not to be delayed the 2 years. Yeah, and so I would like it to be a 3-year probation, but those teachers that provision for everybody. Am I making sense?
Mhm.
Yeah, puzzlement.
I understand what you're recommending.
But that's how it is currently.
Before Senator Locke responds, I just know from being in education that, if an individual is not meeting those benchmarks as an effective instructor in the classroom, that's usually fairly self-evident. After the first year, you have another 2 years to develop those skills to meet those benchmarks. And, I personally feel like 3 years is a sufficient length of time to demonstrate the capacity and capability, for an instructor. But I'm
Madam
interested
Chairman,
here.
are you willing to surrender a teacher that might actually be able to succeed when we have the shortage we have, if they were given a little longer, if they were given a chance?
I mean, back in 2013, when all of these things were being put into place, I'm sorry, it was nefarious as to why it was put there. When people stand up on the floor and call teachers lemons, I'm sorry, that's nefarious.
I'm glad I wasn't there.
And so, I think that, the language that was added in 2013 was not at all about school divisions not being able to fire teachers, because there's language in the code that gives reasons for how you can fire a teacher, or get rid of a teacher. So this language that was put in place was not about getting rid of a teacher, so there are ample ways that can be done. So the language was more about extending the period for limiting due process. So how do we take care of due process within a 5-year period?
I think you should make it 3 years, and for probation, unless there's, I don't know the right language, but you guys may be able to help us. But however you would say it, a case-to-case basis, or if they have the chance for remediation, I don't know what the right language is, but I want to put it at 3 years like you do for everybody, but I don't wanna lose those teachers that are on the bubble that we might be able to save, because there's only 3 years or nothing. And that's my only insight based on the testimony. I'm gonna have to go present to Janet Howell, so I must go.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
Senator Locke, what due process are we talking about that they are losing?
I'll have Kathy respond.
Kathy,
I'm sorry.
what due process are we talking about losing? Because Senator Locke says, I mean, they can be fired for no matter what, I guess,
Yeah.
for 3 years. So what due process are they losing that we're concerned about?
Madam Chair, Senator Peake, the due process is actually described in the section of code that Delegate Bell in his bill. So the.
Yeah, that is, go back to his.
Yes, that's where it describes the due process that would be available to teachers facing dismissal that are not on probation.
So this, Madam Chair.
Yes.
So this is kind of contingent upon Senator Bell's bill as well, or?
It's not.
Not
it's not
contingent upon it, but it would fall back to that due process,
It will use that due process that's
Okay.
already established.
which would give him the panel. Well, that's what he's asking for.
Well, there is a panel, but his bill is asking to expand and make the panel more equitable.
All right, thank you.
Is there a motion on the floor for this bill?
I move to report.
I second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Two things.
2 nays, 3 ayes. Thank you. And Senator Locke, you have 221.
There is an amendment on 221. On the line, no, actually, just a few words. You take it out. For Senate Bill 221, which deals with memorandums of understanding, it was shortened from every 5 years to every 2 years, frequency of the review period for MOUs between school boards and local law enforcement agencies. On line 23, after input, just take out and discussion.
Strikeout and discussion.
And discussion. Basically, this would improve the use of MOUs between local school divisions and local law enforcement agencies by requiring this review of the agreements at least once every 2 years rather than once every 5 years, as the law now states. It would also enable more cooperative relationships between families, community school divisions, and school resource officers by providing an opportunity for public input during the review period of the agreement for communities and families to weigh in on the process and ensure the current MOU is published on the local school divisions' websites so that families and communities can be informed of the agreements that are in place.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee?
Yes, Madam Chair. Senator Locke, just in looking, so it says 5 now, but either party can request one more frequently. Under my reading, and maybe staff, is that correct? So, all right, thanks.
Is there anyone who wishes to speak to the bill, for the bill?
Madam Chair, committee members, Amy Woolard with Legal Aid Justice Center. First, if I may, Senator Peake, just to address your question.
We need to adopt her. So let's go ahead and do that.
Is there a motion to adopt?
Move to adopt.
Second. All in favor?
Aye. You.
No, thank you.
Madam Chair, Senator Peake, the intent of the bill is really to make sure these are living documents that are used by schools, that are known by communities and families. So reducing to the 2 years, even though schools or law enforcement can request review, communities and families are not a part of that. And so the design of this bill is really to just make sure this is a used document, that it's regularly looked at. Many school divisions look at their codes of conduct every year. This sort of goes hand in hand with that process. And the 5-year period, I mean, a family could have a child cycle through an entire school without ever having an opportunity to really be a part of this process. Technology changes very quickly, staff turns over very quickly, and so just think that 2 years is a much more reasonable amount of time for such an important document that needs to be known and used in our schools, and is as much a community document as it is a school or a law enforcement document.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yes, Madam Chair, Senator Peake, my name is Jenny Scatine. I'm with the Disability Law Center of Virginia, and we're in support of the bill.
Thank you. Is there anyone that wishes to speak in opposition to the bill? Is there a motion on the floor about the bill? To report. Is there a second? Second. I'll second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No for me and an abstain for Senator Douglas.
Thank you. So 3 ayes. Thank you, Senator Locke. Senator Favola.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a matter of housekeeping. I would like you to pass by Senate Bill 933 and 934. We're still working with the Department of Education and some school systems on that. I want you to have the perfect bill. I would like to address Senate Bill 167. And what this bill does is it goes right to the dismissal of a teacher. And I have a line amendment. Basically, we would like to just strike section B.
Strike the entire section.
Yeah, please. That's my amendment.
Is there a motion to accept the amendment?
Second.
Second. All in favor? Aye. The amendment has been adopted.
Thank you. And the only thing my amendment does is it removes the definition of incompetency. So there's still the concept of incompetency, but my line amendment, because I removed it from statute, really provides flexibility to school systems to define what they would consider to be incompetency. and we think this is a good compromise. Certainly, this was brought to me by the Virginia Education Association, and I know the superintendents and school systems wanted a compromise, and this is where we ended up. Most states, by the way, do not define incompetency in their code, so my proposal is what I said it is. I can continue to talk, but you may have questions, and I do have speakers.
Madam Chair, so just to make sure I'm clear, the bill as it exists now, the only thing you're changing is to strike section B,
Correct.
so everything else stays the same,
That is correct.
and no changes. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone that wishes to speak in favor of the bill?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, I'm Kathy Birch with the Virginia Education Association, and we are grateful to Senator Pavola for patroning this bill for us. This is another top legislative priority for the Virginia Education Association. It comes out of the same changes that you've already heard in previous bills. This does absolutely nothing to change any of the reasons for which teachers can be fired. The current definition in code is very prescriptive, and it actually allows for one evaluation to be the reason why a teacher can be deemed incompetent and be dismissed. So it removes that possible single reason. The other piece of this definition, consistent failure to meet the endorsement requirements, the teacher is not licensed in Virginia, they're not incompetent, they can't be hired by a school division, they have to have a license. And so the definition is overly prescriptive and is also unneeded. And so we ask that you support the bill.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
question. Kathy, how long has that provision been in the code?
Madam Chair,
If anyone knows.
Madam Chair, Senator Peake, it was part of the legislation in 2012 and implemented in 2013.
So the same thing, we're trying to eliminate everything that was done then.
Madam Chair.
May I respond?
You may respond, Senator.
I appreciate your comment, Senator Peake. I know that the conversation about accountability was very robust in the 2012 session, and we.
I wasn't there, so I don't know.
I was, and it was very robust. But I do wanna note that I think in some respects, we may have overreached, and we're trying to just sort of find a middle ground now. Local school systems are very concerned about accountability as well, and they are they're taking that concept seriously. We're holding them to high standards, taxpayers are holding them to high standards. Children have to perform, and we still have SOLs, and hopefully we'll be looking at performance in a more broader and comprehensive fashion than we have in the past. But requiring definitions in a code that's going to apply to all school systems is not always the best approach.
Thank you. Yes.
Madam Chair, I'm John Suz with Virginia Professional Educators. We strongly support the bill, and just to give you an example of how the present law works, the law that was adopted in 2013, a teacher could have 29 years of perfect evaluations, and during her 30th year, her retirement year, one negative evaluation could result in her dismissal, and we think that's unfair. We think that after 29 years of perfect evaluations, that particular individual deserves at least a 90-day improvement plan, and that's why we support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Sir.
Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Did that happen? Has that happened?
I don't know if it's gone on for 29 years. Somebody received perfect evaluations for 29 years, but I do know that, I know Vern, my other lobbyist, my colleague.
Yes, my 21 years in the classroom, great evaluations. Then at my 16th year, a new administrator came in, get a less than favorable evaluation. I was able to write it, but that's possible it's still there.
And
That's
there,
unfair.
and there are other examples, that didn't actually go to 29 years, or maybe went to 25, 26, 27 years, where teachers did get one bad evaluations, and they were, did one bad evaluation rather, and they were recommended for dismissal. And sometimes it's an older teacher who has a run-in with a younger hotshot assistant principal. Doesn't like older teachers. We see that all the time. And so it lends itself to age discrimination.
Lawsuits for that.
Yeah. Well, it is, well, it's hard to prove, it's hard to, I'm not trying to argue with you, Senator, I'm just saying.
I'm
it's
here to
hard
be argued with.
It's just hard to, age discrimination, of all the types of discrimination out there, age is very, very difficult to prove, okay, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone that wishes to speak in opposition to the bill? Is there a motion on the bill?
Move to report.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No, it-
2 noes, 3 ayes. Thank you, Senator. And there he is, right on time, magic.
Did I hit it? Is this the one time in my
We were
entire
absolutely
life that?
perfect. Welcome. Please.
Thank you. By the way, the committee voted that pass my bill will pass yours by for the day, if not be killed.
You killed my bill.
Yeah,
Killed
we-
my
you
electric
passed by,
vehicle.
you passed by this week.
Thank you.
Question will still be in subcommittee next week.
I know. We're addressing SB 80 then?
And I believe we have a substitute. Distributed.
Thank you, Senator Morrison. We have a motion to move on the substitute. Is there a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Would you like to speak to your bill?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This bill, Senate Bill 80, deals with student journalists. I think we all know that it is critical that students realize the importance of the free press as they begin learning about journalism and the ethics associated with that profession. I am currently the chairman of the Civic Education Commission, and a lot of the members of that commission were heavily engaged in assisting Delegate Hurst, who had introduced this bill, I believe, last year on the House side. It's the first time I believe we have seen it in the Senate. But we put a lot of folks together to come up with this. I think it's important for all of us to encourage young people to get involved, and the first step in getting involved anywhere is writing and reporting and exploring issues that come before us, and especially while we're going through the learning process in school. So this legislation provides that student journalists have the right to exercise freedom of speech and press in school-sponsored media, but carves out exceptions for material that is deliberately libelous or slanderous, constitutes unwarranted invasions of privacy, violates federal or state law, or creates a clear and present danger of an unlawful act. While we must prevent people from being defamed or libeled in student press and recognize the publisher-editor role of school administrators, there is a distinction that must be made clear in the law concerning the difference between controversial content that might be embarrassing and that which implies misconduct that has not been proven. This bill facilitates the ability of student media advisors and professors to teach appropriate ethics to aspiring journalists and provide some protection for them for retaliation if somehow the administration of the school or school board feels like they didn't handle the student publication properly. That is the bill, and the answer, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee?
I have one. Senator Marster, did this come out of some concern or some issue?
I am not aware of any specific issue. I know there have been issues. Certainly, I've read about them in my newspapers at home. That these kinds of disagreements, where there are times when students have stood up and made inappropriate speeches, and other times where they made appropriate speeches that were just embarrassing. And the school shut it down. It's kind of like senators. But I know of no specific case we're dealing with here, but I think there have been a number of instances where there's been differences of opinion on who has the right of final publication, and does the administrator of the school, the principal, have the right to squash something that embarrasses a chemistry teacher but that is pretty much true, but just embarrassing. But what we need to make sure is we're not slandering, libeling, and getting at things that are not been proven.
I had just a question. There is provision in here, to make sure that, the exercise of freedom of speech is, mindful of appropriate language and so forth, but, did we want to say anything specifically about hate speech? Did we want to, make that a little bit more explicit in here?
Well, I think that the hate speech would hopefully be covered by something that creates a clear and present,
Danger.
By inciting, difficulty, which is what essentially hate speech is designed to do, not just to hurt and invade privacy, but to incite folks to some kind of aggression or acts against somebody else, and I hope that's covered in the bill. I do believe it is. This was well vetted by a number of veteran press people and former delegates, and the former head of the Sorensen Institute, who is a professor at the University of Virginia. And so we hope this is a carefully crafted bill that strikes the right balance between students' rights and the fact that we still recognize here that the school is the publisher, and publishers have certain rights of edit.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone that wishes to speak for the bill?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Julia Billingsley with Virginia 21. The measures in this bill protect the work that student journalists do to report on matters that are relevant to their institutions, and we are very supportive of this bill. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I might, I also believe that you were authorized to speak for someone else, or?
The Virginia Press Association, he had to step out and wanted us to let the committee know that they are supportive of this legislation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak for the bill? Is there anyone that wishes to speak in opposition to the bill?
Madam Chair, Stacey Haney on behalf of the School Board Association, since I've been so successful in persuading you so far today, continuing with my efforts. We're opposed to the legislation. We're opposed to the legislation. So if the concept behind this bill is to teach students about the freedom of the press, I want to point out an important fact. If you're a journalist and you work for a newspaper, the freedom of the press protects the ability of the newspaper to publish, not the ability of the individual journalist to decide what is or isn't published in the newspaper that those in charge of the newspaper don't want to have published. And so there's a key difference between what this bill does, which is it's an attempt to give the student autonomy in what's published without regard to what the school system, which ultimately is the owner, if you will, of the publication. So there's a key difference between freedom of the press in the real world and what this bill does. And I also want to point out something that I think is particularly troubling about the bill, and it's on line, I'm gonna have to get reading glasses. It's on line 14 of the substitute. So this bill applies to high school students and middle school students. And I think that I have a concern with the high school students, but especially with the middle school students, giving the middle school students the kind of free rein that this bill proposes to give, should be of real concern to, I think, all the members of the subcommittee. And so I would ask that you not support the legislation.
Hi, Bev Lammy, Henrico Schools. This bill, I'm of course just trying to read the revised copy. I think it really tries to be a lot more specific, but our folks really do have concerns about it. I think Stacey has mentioned the concern about middle school kids. Having taught them for many, many years, the cognitive development is just perhaps not there. Their maturity of understanding the impact of what they have said is probably just that they're not mature enough to really, in our eyes, to do that. I think one of the examples that I might share, this happened in a middle school child was, working on a project and did some, to your point, Senator Morrison did some cartoons of some of the faculty with captions that most people thought were extremely inappropriate, and if it were to be something that was in this environment as he has envisioned, and that were to be published, I think the folks would feel that's a very poor reflection of the school. And this is a teaching environment, and we're trying to teach children which is appropriate and which is not. And I just feel like this bill takes it a little bit, kind of a little bit too far. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Bette Middle and High School Principals, members of the subcommittee. I will just echo what my colleagues just said and add, I know Senator Morrison that you, and I did correspond with Matt, I don't know if you saw my notes, but, we did oppose this bill last year when Delegate Hurst brought it forward. Our concern is our students are students, they're not professional journalists, they're not professional mathematicians, et cetera, et cetera. I did wanna pick up on one thing you did say, and we were talking about, and one of my, principals told me, that embarrassing can also be construed as bullying, and we're very concerned about that, especially with the middle school students, as Stacy said. It can also, I believe your bill also, and I haven't had a chance to read the new bill, but it also addresses advertising as well, is that correct? As I understand it, I believe it includes,
Your substitute is
it does not, okay. But our concern is about, the teaching and the learning and the maturity of these students and the oversight of the school board and the instructional leader and the teachers. Thank you so much.
Thompson Superintendent's Association, again, for the reasons stated, we've got concerns about the bill, specifically the fact that, as Ms. Haney mentioned, in the real world out there, a newspaper is not required to publish something that a reporter has done if they don't feel that it's appropriate. Thank you.
Senator Morrison?
You know, as the bill states, the school is still the publisher and can deal with, you know, when lines get crossed. Or, you know, and sometimes in the real world, it is a toss-up. You know, does this go too far or what have you? And I still think that there's ability here for the school to act in its role as editor, publisher, to stop publication. But it just puts limits on what it is they're able to stop. But they are still ultimately the final arbiter. And you know, if they were challenged under this law by a student, it would be always, you know, an interesting situation. But I think this lays the rules out a little bit more clearly for what ought to be done and what not ought to be done in high school publications. And so I think it's a good clarifying measure, and I hope to have the subcommittee's support.
Madam Chair, I see someone in the audience had something that if we could give her the opportunity to address, would you like, if that we could?
So I just, with what Senator Marston just said, if what he said is the intent, then I think we can work with that, but, in terms of the school still being able to have some control, but what I read on lines 23 through 25, is, you know, student journalism has the right to exercise freedom of speech in the press and school-sponsored student media, including determining the news, opinion, feature, and advertising content. I mean, as I read the bill, the whole point is that the school board and the schools can't have that. So if the intent is other than that, then I'd love the opportunity to work with the patron to clarify that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think what it says is that except as provided in subsection C, so this is where they can exercise control if one of these four on lines 32 through 35, if that becomes the issue, then they can do that as long as one of these four conditions exists, and they are still in control if they believe that one of these four areas of concern here have been breached by the student publication. But what it does is just provide clarity, because otherwise the principal at the school, anything they just don't like is subject to editing or denial of publication. And this just gives administrators the guidelines as to where they can go, where they can't go to suppress a student publication.
Did you want to?
Yeah, Madam Chair, speaking to the bill, I appreciate what Senator Marsh is trying to do, and going back to Senator Locke's question, and we're not aware of any problem. Nothing's made the news here in the state, no student has complained, we've not really seen any issues. And I think what it boils down to now is that's what the government or the school personnel do is this a problem? Is it offensive? Is it gonna bother somebody? Is it out of order? And I just don't see the need for it. Thank you.
I'd like to speak to the bill too. I have heard of instances where students want to present a story, or they've done some reporting and it's been suppressed by the school system. And I'm a very strong advocate of student journalism, having been a school journalist myself, working since middle school on these on school newspapers and yearbooks and so forth. And I think the intent of the bill is wonderful. It is an advocacy for the student voice and the ability of students to begin to develop those very critical and necessary skills of reporting and gathering information. I do share the same concern. I forget who spoke to it about the issue of possible bullying, peer-to-peer bullying in particular. It may not be libelous, it may not be slanderous, it may be the truth that a student journalist is trying to expose, but that particular truth may be quite hurtful for another student or peer, and so that's my primary concern. And I'm wondering if there's a way that we might be able to refine this a little bit further to add some protections for those kinds of issues of bullying within the school system.
I don't know whether bullying, Madam Chair, is defined in the code. We kind of know it when we see it.
Right.
And that's very true with any number of things that the bill addresses there. We all have different opinions on the threshold, and I still believe that the school administration has a good set of 4 principles here that could deal with bullying.
So number 2 constitutes an unwarranted invasion of privacy might
that would probably be as close to a definition of bullying as you're going to get. It is, but I think that there's plenty here that a school administrator could utilize to suppress something that has crossed the line. And I think these parameters give them the guidelines that they would need to take appropriate action on the student publication and exercise their role as teachers and people who are guiding young people on the on ethics. Because if you don't ever get close to the line that could be crossed, you're never going to have an ethical problem. And all it does is this says you can only say absolutely safe things that praise everyone and doesn't put anyone in a negative light. And unfortunately, that's not the way life is. And students need to learn how to do that responsibly. And in this polarized world right now, I think this bill goes a long way towards teaching kids how to do these things, and certainly puts some additional weight on administrators to enforce this, whereas now they have much greater authority to sort of suppress things that make them squirm a little bit. But this moves it along, and if you never get near the line, you're never going to learn anything. And I think that's what the bill does, and I'd encourage its support.
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair?
Yes.
I share the concern about middle school. I don't have any problem about high school, but I do share this concern about middle school.
I would consider that a friendly amendment.
So I would move that we take out middle school.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. So we will move on the amendment to remove the references to public middle schools and focus on the high school's student journalism.
and I would ask that, I don't know the definition of high school anymore. For me, it was 9, 10, 11, and 12, but sometimes they have middle schools, I think that are 7, 8, 9, and you know, whatever, so it might be advantageous to do 10, 11, and 12. I know that's speaking against my own intent here, but would that be clearer?
Will it be a place that calls itself a high school?
Well,
It's 9, 10, and 11, and
yeah, the school in my district, Senator Peak, is Lake Riding Secondary. It's 7th through 12th, all in the same building, and so you may have to get more prescriptive.
Your grade's not here, Bob.
grades 9 through 12.
Is that another amendment? Okay, thank you. Okay, is there a motion, on the floor for the bill?
I would move to report as amended.
Is there I'll second it, and all in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
2 noes.
2 noes and 3 ayes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
So much, Senator.
Look forward to the floor,
Thank
to the, excuse me, to the full committee.
Thank you. And did Senator Barker arrive? We have one bill by Senator Barker. He's not able to come, then I apologize to anyone who is here to speak to the foreign language credit issue. We will try to address that next week then.
How many?
Could we leave you some information?
If you would like to go ahead and speak to the committee, so that you don't have to come back, I'd be happy to.
Yes, that'd be lovely.
If you could.
Yes.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. My name is Stephanie Stockman, and I'm speaking to you today to oppose SB 623, substituting
very good. That's good to know.
computer language for world language credits to the advanced diploma. I'm speaking on behalf of the Virginia Organization of World Language Supervisors, and so, as well as all of the world language teachers in the Commonwealth of Virginia, that computer language encoding does not equate to a world languages class. Just wanted to cite a big study that Google did a number of years ago. It was 1998 to 2017. They examined the skills that go into hiring, promotion, and retention within Google, their company. And they settled on 8 skills that were common denominators amongst their most successful managers and leaders in the committee. And of those 7, knowledge of technical and STEM and mathematics ranked dead last. There were things like being a good coach, listening and communicating well, empathy, respect for others and differences of opinion, supportive of colleagues, critical thinker, problem solver, and to make connections across complex ideas. So all of these things work in concert with the Virginia profile Virginia graduate, particularly the line item of proficiency in languages other than English. That word language comes from the word Latin, meaning, to say lingua, means tongue, actual part of the human body, because it's designed for interpersonal communication, and not a set of code and script. So I was going to leave with that in Virginia we should be expanding communicative language offerings, particularly dual language immersion at the elementary level, and we should be looking for ways to give students an out for really what's considered a core competency in much of the world. Computer science and coding is, yes, it's a worthwhile skill, but it should never come at the expense of foundation of learning second, third, or even fourth language. So that I respectfully and strongly encourage the subcommittee to vote in opposition of 323. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jenna Hines. I am here representing thousands of Virginia families in our grassroots organization, Decoding Dyslexia Virginia. Dyslexic students are at a complete disadvantage with learning a foreign language. It's a language processing issue as well as recognizing, retrieving symbols and their meaning. It is next to impossible for a dyslexic student to learn a foreign language. And it's certainly much harder and puts a lot of stress and strain on them when they're very bright and capable of college prep curriculum.
which is kind of what we're talking about here. There are our top colleges here, like University of Virginia, here in our Commonwealth, that require that advanced diploma to get in. I know my daughter, Sophia, she's 12. She has an average to above average IQ. And she is fully capable of the college prep curriculum, says all her doctors and teachers. However, she doesn't stand a chance at getting the advanced diploma today. Now, our dyslexic thinkers are actually advantaged in STEM. So they have like dynamic thinking, interconnected thinking, mechanical and narrative storytelling strengths that are very appropriate and very geared toward, gives them an edge in design, science, arts, and really creative and innovative thinking, which is what we need here in Virginia as well. We don't want to put them at an even more of a disadvantage and kind of squash their dreams. So we are very much in favor of this bill. Not necessarily coding, but computer science, and a lot of that can be in design and systems thinking.
Just a quick question, and forgive my ignorance, is ASL an option for?
Yes, it is.
so-
Yes,
Yes.
ASL is considered a foreign language
I
by
know
the
it is
Department
in
of
higher
Education.
education.
Yes, I'm aware of that. ASL is an
That was
option.
that was my question.
It has been very difficult for us to get her exposure to ASL at this point. Although, well, our district offers it. I'm in Henrico district. However, they don't have enough teachers for it, and it's very hard to get those classes. So, really, we need more options, not less, for these students. Children or people with learning and attention issues are 1 in 5 of us. Dyslexia is a component of that. And depending on what statistics you look at, between 10 and 15% of the population is dyslexic.
Thank you.
So I'm Dr. Sharon Chinicariello. I'm from the Foreign Language Association of Virginia. And I will speak first of all to the problem of dyslexia. The Virginia Department of Education has an excellent set of resources. The position of the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages and many other professional organizations of language teachers, professionals, is that all students can study a second language. And that with accommodations, dyslexic students can be accommodated. However, there was a provision passed several years ago to give special needs students the ability to do some substitution. So excluding the special needs, which is not what this bill does, FLAVA very much opposes this bill because foreign language and computer science are not equivalent skills. They are both very necessary. The fact that there are SOLs for computer science that run through K through 12 now and are integrated into all public instruction so that students will have that knowledge, but they need both. They need both foreign language, second language, world language, whatever, and computer. My career was in the humanities, but I also worked in information services. The two go together, but they are not equivalent skills. Virginia promotes the seal of biliteracy. Encouraging or incentivizing the substitution of foreign language courses means that fewer students will achieve the seal of biliteracy. Fewer students will be hired. More and more students will have problems getting admitted into the college of their choices. They may not go to college immediately, but somewhere down the line, they're gonna go into higher education, probably. And they will have trouble getting admitted. Schools will not accept computer coding, computer science as a substitute for those requirements. So we very much want to encourage people to think of the future of Virginia in a global environment. The profile of the Virginia graduate talks about building diverse community, communicating with other cultures. That's what foreign language classes do. And I'll finish. one of the delegates of the House of Delegates is quoted in the white paper about computer coding as a vital skill. It should never be at the expense of foreign languages. You need both. The SOLs and the integration of those, of the computer science, computer literacy skills throughout the curriculum ensure the one. We need to make sure the other is also ensured, particularly at the advanced diploma.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you for allowing us to speak.
Madam Chair, Tom Smith, the Superintendent's Association, on two aspects of this. First off, the Superintendent's Association is in strong support based on the variability and the opportunities it provides all children. The second is from a personal standpoint, just to let you know that while I have advanced degrees from George Peabody College at Vanderbilt University and the University of Virginia, languages are just very difficult for me for whatever reason. If this were in place and I were now a student in the Commonwealth instead of where I grew up in Tennessee, I probably would not be able to get an advanced diploma.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate your patience and